So once again, we're reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, so we're continuing our series in Ecclesiastes, and I hope you've been seeing a couple themes that have emerged. The first is that life is hevel. Hevel is this word used 38 times in the book to describe life. In your translation, you probably read it as vanity or meaningless. It's probably not the best translation. Perhaps the best one is breath. Getting at this sense of if you imagine, breathing out on a cold day, you see your breath and then it's gone. So life and all the moments in between are profoundly fleeting and also frustratingly hard to grasp. It can be really hard to understand why our lives work out the way they do. And we can't control life, right? Just like you try to control a wisp of smoke, you can't do it. And so life is hevel. That's one theme. And then along with that, we're seeing this theme of apart from a loving personal God who sustains and creates us, that's all life would be, is hevel. And yet, there's this remarkable balance of life is hevel. It's fleeting, it's painful and frustrating, and life is a gift to be enjoyed. And so what Ecclesiastes does is helps us live with wisdom, and it's maybe one of the clearest books of the Bible in teaching us how to enjoy life as a gift, even though it is hevel. And today we turn to the subject of time. Time. How do we live in time well? And I think my conversations with you, I think you have, but have you ever considered how strange our relationship to time is? So we are creatures of time. We can only live in the present, and yet, even though that's our home, we often don't feel at home in the present. I listen to a child who complains all week about the confines of school and homework and then come around 11 a.m. on Saturday morning. I'm bored. There's nothing for me to do. Right? And as adults, how often do we not live in the present? Right? Just thinking about the past, worried about the future, or maybe you're neurotic like me and you always have an imaginary dialogue going on in your brain with a conversation partner, like anticipating what they're going to say and then imagining your response or your defense, or hopefully this isn't just me, right? So we're often not in the present. And here's how Blaise Pascal put it about 400 years ago, so it was an issue in his day as much as it is ours. He said, "Let each of us examine his thoughts. He will find them wholly concerned with the past or the future. The present is never our end. The past and present are the means, the future our end." And then here's the key. "Thus we never actually live, but hope to live." And that hit me when I read it, because as those who are known and loved by Jesus, we don't want to spend our lives hoping to live. We want to live the lives we actually have, with the people we actually have in front of us. And so our passage is going to help us begin to take some steps in this direction today. And so we'll look at it along these lines. First, we'll see our relationship to time. Second, we'll see our relationship to God, the God of time. And then number 3, how do we live within time well? So our relationship to time, our relationship to God, and then in light of these things, how do we live within time well? All right, so first, our relationship to time. The section begins, verse 1 and 2, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. And continues with a series of contrasts. There's a haunting, almost melodic movement to this poem. It's famous, right, even among those who don't profess faith in Jesus. And as we read this, it can be easy to read it as a series of prescriptions. So I need to figure out when I need to speak and when I need to listen. I need to figure out when I need to hate and love, or embrace and not embrace. But given the context we've been seeing in Ecclesiastes, which is largely about the limitations of human effort and the fact that so much of life is outside of our control, probably the best sense of this poem isn't use wisdom to discern what you need to do and when, but instead, here's how life tends to work. The prescription's going to come after this poem. Here's how life tends to work. Here's how time functions for you as a creature. And we see a few things in this poem. First is that time is full. Time is full. So it starts off a time to be born and a time to die. And this is a literary device scholars call a merism, where it contrasts two polar opposites, and then which implies a totality in between. So it's hard to imagine two more opposites, birth and death. But then you have the variety of life in between, and that's exactly what the rest of the poem does. It gives 13 more merisms, giving polar opposites, right? Planting, plucking up, killing, healing, implying the comprehensiveness of what happens in between. And so first, life is full. So consider the fatigue of college exam week followed by the release of a week at the beach. Or relationally, the variety of experiences. One person walks in your door and it fills you with joy and security. Another person, like just to hear their name, makes your chest clench up in anxiety or maybe even rage. And within the same day, consider the fullness of life. I can recall a day where there was one moment where I smiled so large I felt like I needed a bigger face to hold my grin. And then an hour later received a phone call that sent me and Kelsey to the sofa holding each other in tears. Life is full, the beauty, the horror, and everything in between. Second, we see time is always changing. Time is always changing. It's a huge implication of this poem. And so if you can be certain of anything, it's that the season that you're in now probably won't be the season that you remain in. So consider feeling comfortable in your job, only to have the next week have an email come in announcing that your company is downsizing. Or relational seasons. One season you're in a profound season of relational connection and vibrant community, and then you're thrown into a season of searing loneliness, or you're just with people you don't really care for. So it can go from the high to the low, but it can also go from the valley to the mountaintop. So maybe there's a season where you can barely pay your bills, and then a new season you have so much cash coming in, you help others pay theirs. You might be in a season of estrangement from a family member, and then a couple years later you can smile warmly over a meal together. So time is always changing, and wisdom means recognizing this fact ahead of time. So I think any of us would say, yeah, of course, I know life changes, and yet so many of us, when we go from a time of peace to thrust into a period of suffering, we're overshocked by it, right? As if we're entitled for good times to continue. Or you might be in a season of hardship. It might be your infant child not sleeping well in the night. It might be a really hard relationship or something with your health and your job. And you, deep down, or maybe not so deep down, there's a sense of life is just always going to be this way. The season's horrible. It's just always going to be this way. Maybe not. Probably not. So life is full, and time changes. And number 3, this fullness and changing of time is outside of our control. So this list right? War and Peace, Weeping and Laughing. This isn't like a Netflix queue where you just go down and say, I want some of this and some of that, and I want some of this. And no, these events thrust themselves upon you without asking your permission. And so wisdom means recognizing this, that so much of life I can't control. And for some of you, maybe this means if you're the more passive type, you just kind of sit back and bemoan your circumstances, or if you're the doer, you take the approach of Dylan Thomas, don't go gentle into that good night, rage against the dying of the light. That's some of you. And so as we think about how time works, just let's take a moment of reflection just to pause and think about what season are you in? Try to think of it in a word or a few. Right? Boring, exhausting, confusing, really happy. You can just take a moment to name this to the Lord directly. Lord, I feel like I'm in this season right now. And as we do that, let's look at the next thing we need to do, right? Because do we just resign ourselves or fight with all our might? Probably neither. Ecclesiastes gives us a really helpful approach. And the first thing is to consider our relationship to God, the Lord of time. We see a few things about the nature of God in here and his relationship to us. The first is that God is God and you are not. One of the best lessons to learn, in fact, in the whole Bible. God is God and you are not. Verse 11 is key here. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So on the one hand, God has put eternity into your and my heart. So we each have a capacity to reflect and to plan in a way that the animals don't. But I think even more than that, the sense of an eternity being on our hearts is each person, and I think you know what I'm talking about, has this inarticulable longing, this maddeningly sweet sense of something more, forever rich as autumn and forever new as spring. I think you know what I'm talking about. Like, no matter even being in the best moment or season, there's something more, this longing in our hearts to fully imbibe eternity. And yet we can never fully quite grasp it because we're made in the image of God, but we're not God. The second part of that verse, we cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. So only God fully inhabits eternity. Only God fully knows the reasons for the seemingly nonsensical ways of life that we witness. So we're made in God's image, but we're not God. So that's number one. God is God, you are not. Number two is we see that God is making everything beautiful. The first part of verse 11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. And so there is pain you will experience. Okay? Not embracing, killing, lack of peace, losing, being cast away. Right? God in the Bible never minimized these realities. And at the same time, God has made so many beautiful things, birth and laughter and food and dancing. And in the big picture, he's making everything beautiful, even if we can't see it in the moment. You may have heard of the metaphor of a tapestry, where if you're looking at the back of it, you just see this jumble of threads and colors, and it doesn't make sense. It maybe even looks ugly, and then you flip it over and look at the front, and it's this intricate design. And so much of life is us just seeing the back of that tapestry, whether it's our life or events in the world, and yet God is making it look like the front. See where it says at the end, God is going to seek out what has been driven away. And this is really good news, that God is the final author of our story. We co-author, but God is the final author. Here's how one individual put it in reflecting on God being the author and making everything beautiful. He said, "My story has broken characters, jarring interruptions, relationships caught in tensions and difficulties. Thank goodness I'm not the sole author of my life. What a poor patchwork my story would be. God will seek out parts of my past and beautify them into a harmony I can't presently imagine. So God is making everything beautiful in your life and in mine. Which leads to number 3, our relationship to God, is that he is trustworthy. So notice this. One person who was editing my sermon this week pointed out that this verse in verse 11, right, he's put eternity in our hearts. That can be really frustrating. It's like, why give us this unscratchable itch that we can never fully satisfy? And we get part of an answer in verse 14 where it says, God has done it, referring to everything prior, so that people will fear before him. And this is a rich word, fear, but part of what it's getting at is a deep conviction of love and trust with God, knowing that he is trustworthy. And so it's actually a mercy that, like, on the one hand, God gives us so many gifts and says, enjoy them. We'll see this more in a minute. But yet he never lets them fully satisfy our souls, because at least if we have the eyes to see and don't close ourselves up to reality, it reminds us, this constant unsettledness about us, that it's only in the Lord that we find our full home, both now and then fully in the life to come. And he alone is trustworthy to find our home in. And most of all, we see this in Jesus, who the same God of Ecclesiastes is the God revealed to us in Jesus. And consider how this poem is true of Christ. There was a time for Jesus to be born, Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. There was a time for him to die, Romans 5:6. At the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. This wasn't random. This was according to his time. And in between, right, this merism, he subjected himself to all the same seasons that we go through, healing and mourning, being loved, being spoken against, knowing when to speak and when to open not his mouth. After his death, there was a time to rise, 1 Corinthians 15:4, on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. It's a way of saying according to the time God had prophesied. And I love this verse. And he'll return for us according to his time. Hebrews 9:28. Christ will appear a second time to save those eagerly waiting for him. Meaning, you aren't the victim of your life or random events that you're helpless to stop. But this Lord of time, who loves you and gave himself for you, is overseeing time, is with you, and making all things beautiful. And because he is, you and I are free to enjoy this life. Verse 12, I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful. I think of when we often didn't take elaborate vacations as a kid, but there was a year where my parents took, they would at least try to get us to the beach each year. And my memory of it is my parents weren't stressed at all, and they just throw us into the back of the minivan. And, they just make sure that me and my siblings have enough fruit by the foots and Runts candies. Remember those Runts? I was talking about those with Kelsey last time. I was like, we need to go find those. And made sure my Game Boy had enough batteries. And all I knew was we're going to some sandy spot. I didn't know where exactly it was on the map. I wasn't Andrew Workman, who had an obsession with maps at age 3, right? And I didn't even know how we're going to get there. And how much was I worried about it? 0. Because I trusted my mom and dad to get us there. And that's what Ecclesiastes is saying. When you're fully in the Lord's arms, yes, there are going to be hard things, but there are so many aspects of the ride that you can still enjoy in ways that you can live really well no matter what season you're in. And so let's look at that. What are some ways we can inhabit time well? What are some ways we can inhabit time well? And I think one of the first steps, right, after the most important one of letting yourself be loved by Jesus, is release the need for control. Something that's been clear throughout Ecclesiastes, and especially true here, is release the need to control what season you're in. Because the more you try to demand that life or a relationship or something in your life be going a certain way, it's going to be hard to live well. I think about when Kelsey and I first got married, we were thrown into a series of financial and medical hardship. Kelsey is in constant pain. Doctors can't figure out what's going on. We can't pay our bills. And I used to work in the private sector, and I'm at my desk, and the waiting area was within speaking distance of the waiting area. And this old man comes in, and one thing leads to the next, and he asks what I'm going through. And I just start to share, and he goes, "You're pretty upset about this, aren't you?" And I was like, yeah. And he goes, just take it from someone he and his family have been through a lot of health issues. Like, you can either sit here and keep pouting about it, or you can accept reality and say, this is my new reality. This is my wife's new reality. And take control over what you can control. And I didn't receive this well in the moment. It's like, have you ever heard of unsolicited advice? But as I went home and thought about it, I was like, there is, one, my parents taught me to listen to my elders. I was like, there is some wisdom there. So there was a just anger I had toward the hardship we were going through and seeing my wife in pain, but that just anger turned into a brooding, where it was just like, I'm just gonna stay here and pout because life isn't going how I want. And so this affected how I showed up in my job. It affected how I showed up for my loved ones in my church and my friends. And so for you, just consider, especially if you're in a season of hardship, you might be regularly thinking about, I miss it when my friendship situation was like this. I miss it when my church was like this. I miss it when my job or my health is like this. Those are actually things that you should bring before the Lord. God never says call something unpleasant pleasant. And we also need to go directly to the Lord and say, and yet, Lord, here is the season I'm in. Help me to live well. Okay, which leads to number 2. So we release control of the season we're in. And number 2 is we know that we're with Christ, who's overseeing our life and making everything beautiful. We receive with joy the gifts that are given. Right? Be joyful and do good as long as they live. And even like I was in the back of my minivan enjoying the snacks, it almost literally says that. Also that everyone should eat and drink. Right? So while you cannot control the seasons that come to you often, you can control having gratitude toward the gifts God places in front of you. I was hanging out with my siblings recently, and we were like, this theme of vacations. Like, can you believe how ungrateful we were toward our parents when we were kids? So they saved up for years to take us to Disney World. And then the whole time we're in Disney World, why are we at this restaurant, not that restaurant? Why are we in this hotel, not that hotel? Why did you take us to a place so hot? The whole time missing the gifts that were in front of us, and more importantly, missing the gift givers who gave so much to experience these things and time with them. And for you and I, few things wither our souls more than to refuse to see the gifts and the gift giver of so many good things. And honestly, also, few things make us more unpleasant to be around than just that ambient, low-level complaining that we can live in. Even if we don't say it, it comes through. And this struck me. So one commentator on Ecclesiastes, he said, so as we think about sins, we often think about the more obvious stuff. So like envy and arrogance and lust, and yes, these things are sins to be fought. But yet one of the things that there are commands to be grateful in Ecclesiastes and all throughout the Bible, commands to enjoy life. So it's saying it is just as much of a sin as it is to look at pornography or have sex outside of marriage or be cruel toward a person that you live with or work with. It's just as much of a sin when God puts something truly enjoyable in front of you and you put your foot down and say, no, I'm going to pout and be miserable and refuse to see and appreciate this gift that you've given me and you as the gift giver who's handing it to me. And so there's a hard challenge there. And also at the same time, can you think of a better command than God insisting, enjoy life? So I think about my past 2 weeks, right? I had 6-inch thick Japanese jiggly ube pancakes. I didn't even know those things existed. I got to see my dad. It was only for 30 minutes, and we had some hard family things to discuss, but we got to hug one another and say, I love you. I got to have a pastry with my children. Right now, I'm getting to experience looking at the boundless riches of Jesus with people I can call my brothers and sisters because of Jesus as we're on our way to the best party ever. My eyes are more open now to the wonder that is now than it was before I started studying Ecclesiastes. And so for you, what's just one of the many gifts you can have your eyes to see? Right? Whether it's can't wait for that first fall morning air on our face, right? Or something sweet you get to experience with somebody. You know, there are so many gifts we get to enjoy. So enjoy the gifts that are given. And number 3, as we release control, we enjoy the gifts that are in front of us, we do good. So I perceive that there's nothing better than to be joyful. So enjoy gifts and do good. And I love this because it protects us against a kind of self-indulgent joy where all I'm just going to think about is me, me, me. And it protects against a kind of fatalism where like, all right, well, I guess this is happening in global affairs, or this is happening in politics, or this is happening in my family as it's falling apart. I guess I just got to resign myself to the seasons. No, if you're in a happy season, awesome. Celebrate it and do good. If you're in a hard season, grieve it and lament it and do good, because there is always good that we can do. If you're familiar, the former senator and university president Ben Sasse, he's in his early 50s, I think, and has terminal pancreatic cancer. And he's a Christian, and as far as I can tell, he's living his life with Jesus very well during this period, especially as a public figure. And hopefully we can, if there's any partisan feelings, hopefully we can just look at the life he's living with Christ. And his daughter, Alex, I believe, she wrote an article titled "How Ben Sasse Raised Me." It's a great article. And one of the things she points out, she said, something my mom and dad would ask us every night at dinner is they wouldn't ask us parents, this is a good lesson, they wouldn't ask us, what did you learn today? They'd ask us, who did you serve today? So I come home complaining about a mean girl at school. I'm so sorry. Who'd you serve today? I come in anxious about a college application, sit with me in that, and who did you serve today? And she's like, this really irritated me in the moment. But what it taught me to do is against my culture, which tells me I find my authentic self and I'm most happy when I keep looking within. That actually just makes me more miserable and anxious and self-absorbed. But instead, when I'm looking at things through the lens of who am I serving today, it not only helps me become more alive, but everyone I'm in relationship becomes more alive too. And the thing is, see, what Ben Sasse did here is he wasn't doing this just like you hear often in our modern secular culture, which, offering a lot of things, it can't offer more than do good and be kind just because. Well, the furthest you go is, well, don't you like it when people do this to you? Okay, so you're appealing to my self-interest to do something unselfish. But the reason why Ben instilled this in his children was because of heaven. And because that he knows he was first loved by a Savior and continues to be loved, and his children are too. And so for you and I, loved by Jesus, the Lord of time, we are free to release control, enjoy the gifts that he's given us. And today and this week, just ask, who can I serve as I've first been served by him? Let's pray.